This podcast was recorded on July 9th, 2017. By the time you hear it, things may have changed. Welcome to Black Women Talk Politics. I'm Sheila Strain Clark.
I'm Sabrina Williams.
And we are joined today by our very special guest, Tanya Golash-Boza.
Dr. Tanya Golash-Boza.
Oh yes, doctor. Doctor in the house. All right. Well, Tanya, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're so glad to have you, and thank you for coming all the way from Cali to hang with us on the East Coast for a little while.
My pleasure.
But this is your hometown, right?
Yeah.
DC?
Yeah.
Right. So.
And she's a Terp.
Okay, Terp, DCPS graduate. We are so happy to have homegrown flavor, right?
Yep.
So, all right. Well, it's been 2 weeks since we've been here, and of course, it's been a busy 2 weeks, like always.
Stuff has happened.
Our political community never ceases to amaze us, slow down, or anything. So, it's been a really big foreign policy week. But first, we wanted to talk about something that was a little closer to home.
Right.
And what I mean by that is talking about the Stand Your Ground law, which was something that we all became familiar with when Trayvon Martin, was murdered in 2012 by George Zimmerman, and George Zimmerman, as we all know, got off, right? And he used the Stand Your Ground law as the basis for his defense, and he was successful.
Even though he was the aggressor. We want to keep that. He was the aggressor.
Right, totally. I mean, Trayvon was unarmed. You know, he had, matter of fact, the hoodie and the bag of Skittles, right? That's the symbol of, the loss of his life, really. So this law in Florida has been in existence since 2005. And so what's happened recently is that this law was updated by the state legislature. And what the state legislature did, so the progression is the Stand Your Ground law says that if you kill someone in self-defense, you may not be convicted, right? And so that's the basis. And previously, before this law, you were expected to retreat first as your first ground of self-defense versus be aggressive. Okay.
Yes.
So then the second change to the law began from the Supreme Court. They said, well, the defendant themselves would have to prove that they were defending themselves. But underneath some lobbying by the NRA, the Republicans, there's a Republican governor there. There's strong Republican presence in terms of gun rights. There was an amendment or an update to the law, which was that the prosecutor now would have to prove that the defendant did not use self-defense. So it kind of turned it around and made, instead of the defendant having to come forward with a plausible rationale for it, it forced the prosecutor to prove that before moving forward with prosecution, right? So it created it created an undue burden on the prosecution, and so what the result was a lot of cases were thrown out by judges because it didn't even have to go to trial, didn't even have to go to jury if the prosecution couldn't prove this. So what happened was there was a Judge Hirsch in Florida who made a decision that the law was unconstitutional, but it was about process. I think that's important to note because it wasn't unconstitutional on its face, which I think is another.
To shoot 17-year-old unarmed black men, that's not unconstitutional. But.
Right. Well, the whole thing is just foolishness because the ironic thing about this legislation was that when there was a black woman who was in a domestic violence situation, her name was Marissa Alexander, and she tried to use the Stand Your Ground law as her defense. It didn't go, right? So she was convicted and was given 20 years, although she only served 3. So a lot of people say this is a race-based law.
Oh, absolutely is.
It's okay for you if you're white
to
kill a black person, but if you're a black person using the same self-defense, right, then it's not going to work for you. So this judge said
it's like riding in the car when you're black. It doesn't necessarily work. It's the same premise.
Yeah,
right?
it's crazy. But I think what's interesting, the takeaway from this is a small victory.
Yes.
It's a small victory because the burden, it's not so easy for a person to just shoot another person and get off. However, we should be watchful because the Republicans are still in control of Florida. Yeah. We know Miami-Dade is a very brown county, right? A very brown area. And so we know that if this does get upheld in the appellate court or the next highest court, because of course there's going to be an appeal.
Right.
And the Republicans are going to say, no, the legislator was the perfect entity. And other people are going to say, no, it should have went to the Supreme Court. And who knows, maybe they'll even push it to the Supreme Court. But it's a possibility that this could be overturned. And we could be looking at a state or a place where not only can you just suggest that it was self-defense, but the prosecution will have to prove that you weren't using it. You won't have to prove that you were using it. So it's really one to watch. I'm grateful for the small victory, but I think it's more to come. And it's really one of those things that's really important to our community, and we really need to keep watch on this. So.
Right. Well, in other news, there was the G19 summit. The G20 summit, and where we have now. I read that in the Washington Post, there was quoted that we are continuing, or Trump is continuing to be the worldwide agitator, and so while we have pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and everybody else is continuing to go on because climate change is important. Climate change is it's real, and apparently we're the only ones that think it isn't. And so
even when the scientists
science isn't real. Again, science isn't real. But they've acknowledged that the United States is not going to be a part of the agreement, and that is fine. But I feel like there was also like the undertone of just going to Germany, and there was so much more protest and so much more violence than there has been in years. And it wasn't the welcome that, and there's always protest at the G summits. That's just how it is.
Right.
But this year it was so violent. It was so aggressive. And I just feel like that's the tone, and that's the tone that our administration has where it goes, right? And he did go to Warsaw, where he was welcomed.
Warsaw was very well. He was welcomed because
they bussed in about however many people were there from surrounding village. That wasn't actually the people who were in Warsaw proper. They actually bussed in folks.
Oh, really? Well,
like they do for his protest here.
Except for his inauguration, where
right?
There was patches of ground with no people standing. But
yes.
I was going to say one of the things about the leader of Poland is that person is very nationalistic.
Absolutely.
And that person is very anti-media.
Yes.
And so, of course, it's like his peer.
And very anti-gay and anti-brown and anti. So it's very in line with the way this administration is going.
So, of course, he was welcome because, like hangs with like. And so it's not surprising. Whereas, like in Germany, he was not welcomed.
Right. And I feel like we know that the U.S. is isolating itself on climate change, but I feel like we're also isolating ourselves in a lot of other areas. And we should really be careful because this is a world that we are supposed to be the quote unquote leader of, but also that doesn't mean that you get to, but again, we have a bully president, because I say you don't want to bully, but I think every podcast I've used the term bully because it's what we do. It's what he's doing. He's bullying, but we want to be able to get along and figure things out like climate change and work around, what's the best economics for the world. It's not just us, right? So yeah, our economy is going well, but how the G20 summit is also to come with other nations to find out how the world economy is doing. And so if we're not going to play nice, then it has very big ramifications that people don't even think about. So because climate change is in there, but there are other pieces to this puzzle that are just as big, And if we're not getting along, then what does that mean for the world?
Right.
And for us, we can't be a silo. He wants to be a silo.
Right.
He thinks that that's okay, but it's never worked.
Well, actually, he wants to be aligned with Russia. Apparently, that's his best friend.
Not even a silo. Yeah.
I know we're going to talk about that in a way, but that's the irony of everything, right? Like, there's been this uncomfortable relationship with Russia, and not that
who's
anyone
been our
wants-
sworn enemy, not an ally ever.
right. I mean, it's not like we want to go back to the Cold War.
No,
But
right,
you
but
know,
you just
every like
there
it
was a
seems-
reason. There's a reason, and it's still that the threat still exists. Nothing has changed except for the person who's come in office on our end.
Right.
But everything and all of their policies, and in fact, he's now saying backing off. We guess we're going to segue into Putin. With the meeting where Tillerson was in the room, Putin was in the room,
and Trump.
Trump,
That's it.
and it was pretty much
No
that
media.
and no media. And so, whatever you come out of the room, you can say, you know what, I came out and we had, we talked about blue fairies. Nobody knows. There's no record. There is no transparency. We have no idea. And then you're flip-flopping on whether or not we're going to backpedal on the fact that Russia had anything to do with the election. We should wake up. We should listen to
He's
this.
still so concerned about, the legitimacy of his presidency or the appearance of illegitimacy, which, I mean, I think at this point,
We know it's illegitimate, and
well, that's true. We know he lost the popular vote, but
5 million.
I think we've talked about this before too. Like everybody's like, that's not the issue anymore. Like no one's going to
Right.
dethrone you.
Right, yeah, dethrone you. Yes,
but,
you're there.
But your the
It's
continual
insecure.
denial of even recognizing the intelligence of our own, like, so there's a dismissal. Like one of the things that really
Yeah.
irritated people was the dismissal of our intelligence community while he was in a foreign. No, first of all, it's just disrespectful. Period. He's been dismissive the whole time.
And this is dismissive again when he's now coming forth and still questioning the validity of the Russian hacking. And so, what does that say for our intelligence? Who's Sally? Who was the
Sally Yates.
Sally Yates? She was, I think, the person that I read the quote saying how it is. I mean, what are you saying to our intelligence community? How are you?
Everybody's out. Everybody's pissed off, like the CIA people.
They should
Everybody.
be.
Yeah, right. Because I mean, this is like they talk about. These are career professionals.
Yes.
These are people who are not politicians.
No, and they're here to protect us.
People have a political affiliation. I mean, that's the way
that's
our
what it
country is. You're D, you're R, you're I. Right?
Right.
You're going to be one of these things. In most cases,
But when you're
Democrat,
protecting
Republican, or
us, that's
independent.
just-
But
it's like
I
when you
mean,
go
I
out
still have a
into war.
job to do. Right?
Right.
Like we're going to perform our duties and to indicate that. Our whole profession, which many people have sacrificed a lot for their career, that you're going to compromise your professional integrity for politics is.
But I feel like the intelligence community is sort of like when you go to war, right? So when you're on the battleground, you're not looking to your brother in arms or your sister in arms and saying, what's your political affiliation? No. When they're in that room, what is the threat? So it doesn't matter if I'm a Republican and I support Donald Trump or if I'm a Democrat and I supported Barack Obama. If there is a threat to the United States, we become the one America, the one Americans, and we have to now fix that threat. We have to address the threat. And so that is where he, I believe, is being, like you said, very dismissive and just, I mean, it's, I don't know.
Well, I think that in terms of the climate piece, the good news was that the 19. So I think
right. Everybody else is going to say right.
Well, one of the big questions that was going through folks' head was, okay, now that Trump is saying he's out, what will the other countries do?
Right.
And so what the
Everybody's
other countries
in.
did was they explicitly broke from him,
Yep.
and they embraced signing an international deal, and is a detailed policy blueprint that's going to outline how their country could meet the goals in the pact. So basically, the other 19 members of
they're
going to go forward. They're going to step up and compete and have competition in the clean energy marketplace. And that's the other thing, there's an economic consequence of deciding you're not going to play.
Absolutely.
Because the green technologies and green industries are really future moving and future forward. And so when we're saying
Coal
we're not going to be a
industry is
part of
dead.
that, we're going to let other countries take the
Dictate that.
lead in innovation. And essentially that will impact what he says is his biggest priority, which is jobs.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I
And
think
we're gonna have
that's
to
why
pay
they talk
big.
so much about him being isolated at the
absolutely.
G20, because, he's taken this stance of, we're not going
doing it
to.
too.
And I think other people have taken the stance as well, like, we don't really need you.
Right. And this, like you said, flows into the economy. So the G20 is bigger than just climates, but it's also about the world economy. And so, but this climate and green energy is going to affect the economy moving forward for everyone, because that is the big thing.
Because climate change is happening. I mean, it's just no denying it. Having an EPA director that denies it.
Right.
It's just like having an HHS secretary who, basically says people coming off Medicaid can purchase private insurance.
Right.
Both of these things are in direct conflict of interest.
Or having the head of the Department of Justice be a racist. So, I mean, it's all conflicting. There's nothing that's not here.
It is. Well, what did you think of Trump saying that, there's this whole thing about Putin said he didn't compromise our election,
right,
and Trump agreed with him. And so
they're boys.
So Putin is putting this out. Yeah. And then he also has said, very ironically, well, go ask him.
Go ask him. Because Putin knows, Trump is scared to death of him, and he's never going to stand up. It's never. There's so much there that we just will never know, but we do know. We don't know, but we know there's something there. And so Putin, he plays him at every option, every chance he gets. He is daring him to say something. I dare you to say something against me.
Wow.
In my opinion, because if he does, there is a shoe that can drop.
Yeah.
Because why else would you deny the fact that Russia? I mean, you like you said, he's the president. There is no harm or foul in saying, God, they interfered. We need to address that because that's presidential. That's what, unless somebody has the foot on your neck, and that's what I believe is happening.
Right. And he may. I just feel like. And there were also some missed opportunities at G2. I mean, I'm sure there were millions, but people talked a lot about North Korea. And how, there was this opportunity to galvanize
folks together.
Everybody
Absolutely.
around North Korea.
Nobody wants North Korea to have. We sound like it's only us that. I mean, whenever the president he goes out,
right.
Nobody wants that to happen.
Right. I mean, when they're talking about a missile that can go to Alaska.
Right.
I'm like, wow, like how long do they make a missile? How long is it before there's a missile that can come to California, that can come to D.C.? So, I mean, that would have been
or any other part of the world. Mm-hmm. So then what about Paris then? I mean, North Korea Alaska's a lot. I mean, Paris is a lot closer to North Korea than Alaska is. And so you're right, to a chance, an opportunity, which is missed. But I feel like we have been saying this over and over again with different parts of this administration where that's an opportunity that was missed, and not even missed. He wasn't even checking for the opportunity. Right. He didn't even think he will handle it. I feel like it's what we're the all-knowing, all-governing.
And I'm like, where's his advisors on this? I mean, even if he is not the brightest bulb, someone there.
There's no bright bulbs.
Maybe. I mean, they're all broken.
Of the knives
they're
are
all
dull.
broken. Okay.
The knives
really,
are dull.
I mean, well, they don't believe in probably like the.
They don't know.
Anybody bulbs that are like going with climate control, and they're probably like
the LED.
Right. They're probably like the old joints. You know what I mean? Like the ones that burn out in 3 days.
What we know about this president is that there's been the argument is that if you don't play his game, he gets rid of you. If you're not his boy, you're out. And so that's the thing. If you're not playing his game, you're out of the game.
What did you think of Ivanka sitting in that seat?
I thought nepotism. I mean, I thought that there would have been no way that however old the Obama girls were, that would have been even appropriate or.
Oh, that would have never happened. So right,
so I feel like it's just he allows us to see how much he's going to, because his family's not supposed to be in the mix, right? That's because they're doing his business. So if they're doing his business dealings, supposedly. But I guess she's not. She's now part of the administration.
See, it's kind of disrespectful if you think. I mean, I looked at the picture. There's Merkel there. There's all these other people that are heads of states, and then there's like Ivanka.
It's a power
play.
She's
head of a fashion line. I mean, I'm all for like women entrepreneurs, and I'm not a fan of Ivanka anyway. But come on, like people said, you're unqualified, you're unelected, it's inappropriate. This is for leaders of countries. You are. It's
his power play.
She's the daughter of the president. Like, great, but
that's it. That's her only credential.
Have been like outside waiting,
It seems like it's part of this kind of anti-intellectualism that you all are talking about with regard to rejecting the climate agreements, or sort of all the scientists saying climate change is definitely happening.
Right.
And then we just put Ivanka up there. It doesn't matter. She doesn't have any real expertise in international relations.
Right.
But she's a businesswoman, so obviously, and I think that's kind of Trump's line. Like, I'm a business person. Right. I created a lot of money, therefore I know how to do things. So if he's just sort of taking that, with putting Ivanka there, he's kind of saying, well, look, she created a business too. Obviously, she knows stuff. That's all you need to know is how to like
make money,
make a profit.
Right. Right. That's so interesting and true. Well, it's
we're in the time of Trump.
It's craziness. So I think, moving so while Trump was at the G20, meanwhile back at home, there was the Senate health care bill that was dying a slow death, I hope.
I do too. I mean, according to John McCain, Senator McCain today on Face the Nation, my view is that it's probably going to be dead. So that is the hope. They need 50 of the 52 Republican senators to sign off on this. It doesn't, I mean, if you have someone with a pre-existing condition, if you have someone who is relying on Medicaid, if you have someone who is a woman in your district, you should think twice or very carefully about signing this health care bill. It doesn't assist anybody. No. I think everybody loses with this.
Yeah, well, at least 22 million
At least
people,
20, right, at least 22
we
more
at least
million.
20,
yeah.
Would lose, and then a total of 49 million people would be
total.
uninsured. So
right.
we know at least those people. They'll
and
be
then
worse off.
For those of us, again, who have a pre-existing condition of apparently just being a woman, your premium and ovaries, your premiums are going to go up. There are things that you need to watch out for. So even if I can afford my insurance, what is it going to look like for me to just go to get my Pap smear? What is that going to look like? Those are things that we have to question. Those are things that we have to be aware of. And so July 29th, you need to call your senators, call your representatives, and make it hard. Let them know you cannot do this. This will not work. July 29th is the deadline. So if you get enough backlash, and we're pushing this by July 29th, if it is not signed, it is dead in the water. So let that be our charge through the month of July, through July 29th, making this not an option.
And we know, and we talked about this the last time, the most outspoken critics of the bill on the Republican side, because no Democrats are going to vote for this. So it's West Virginia,
awesome,
Maine, Louisiana, Indiana, North Dakota, and West Virginia. So those are the places where where the Republicans know there is very little support. And Susan Collins, we were talking about it was 4th of July since we came back, or since we've been gone. 4th of July happened. That's what I'm saying. And so Susan Collins talked about how she was out at 4th of July parades in Maine. And she said, normally people are coming up to me with all kinds of stuff. I've got this issue, I've got that issue. And, she's fielding a lot of different and competing interests. But she said the issue that came up the most was health care.
Right.
So there's a big, big concern. And the Republicans are concerned when they start talking about, well, we guess it's going to have to be a bipartisan effort. That's when they pretty much are serving up defeat, because that probably makes them flip over a gazillion times. But bipartisan effort is probably what it's going to take. And it's really important I think people
But that's not something that can happen by the 29th, because bipartisan effort, that means you need to go back to the drawing board. You need to rethink and retool this bill so that it is inclusive and that it helps.
Come closer to Obamacare, and that's what they hate. In order for it to be bipartisan,
to something that's human and that's not going to kill people, because that's what it will do. We had who was the guest who said that it would be a genocide.
Right.
For a lot of the people, Allison said that it would be a genocide for HIV care, because that's wiped out. That's only Medicare. So you have these millions of people will not be able to get their medication. If I don't get my medication, I die.
Yeah. When you talk about 49 million people, this was a pretty good analysis. Someone said, did you know that 49 million people would be more than the population of almost 24 states in our nation? So that's almost half of our. So if 49 people went without health insurance, it would be like the equivalent of 24 states, their entire population not having health care, including Kansas, Hawaii, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oklahoma, West Virginia. Goodness. So if half of our country, or at least if half of the states in our country had no health insurance. That's what the equivalent is of 49 million people. So it's not a small, it's not something that should be dismissed,
and it's not
or handled
sustainable.
lightly.
That is going to be horrific. Just what are the repercussions of that? So 49 people not health. That means people are starting to die.
People are going to die. People are going to die. And women's rights. I guess before we're going to transition, I know, but one of the things that's really interesting to me is that the Republicans have this position of less government. Right. That's their key position. Less government, less regulation. You should be able to live your life the way you want to, right? But at the same time, when it comes to the issue of choice and your choice for your body,
Right.
you know, they're very pro government
Oh,
telling you
gosh.
what to do. So it goes back to
We are
sexism, right?
We are
It's
second
sexism.
class citizens.
Right. So from a business and economic perspective, I want all my money for me,
Right.
only for me, and not to share. But when it comes to you women and for your bodies, I want to dictate what you can and can't do. There's something going on in Arkansas right now that says a woman would have to notify the man that she had sex with that impregnated her if she wanted to have an abortion, right? If she had to legislatively has to. So I have
so
to
ridiculous.
tell you, you know, that I'm going to have an abortion. That goes for even sexual assault survivors, right? So I mean, again, this is this tone of
We don't matter.
Government, we want to deregulate when it works for us.
Right, and
we
totally
want to
regulate.
regulate when it works
Well,
for us.
what is his name? Who said that women cannot wear? He posed that women can't wear sleeveless shirts in the house. I mean, on the Senate
maybe
on the
Mike,
floor.
maybe Mike
No,
Pence,
it wasn't.
because he
It
has
was
all
Paul
kinds of
Ryan.
radical views.
Paul Ryan this week.
Oh,
This
Paul.
is serious. Paul Ryan said that women. He was questioning the fact that women could not wear sleeveless or showing shoulder bearing. What in the hell is
Are they
happening?
just trying to go back to, I guess, the Puritan age or whatever? I mean, I'm so over it.
So
you
it's
know?
all about that. It's all about the control.
And it's all about sexism. And so again,
100%.
having this president who actually who should, I mean, that's the other, we haven't even talked about that. We're not going to go there, except for to say there was a barrage of insults against a woman
Mika.
correspondent. Again, whenever there's women, there's a mention of blood. I don't know why he's
Right.
obsessed with women's periods. Like, it's
Right.
too much, right? You know, I mean, you say women and then there's blood. You know, I mean, come on, dude. Like, so, you know,
Yeah.
again, there's no respect. And for the women that supported him, you really need to, like, check yourself, because it's,
Question.
I don't
What
understand
happened?
what's going on here. I guess the last thing we wanted to talk about really quickly was the Election
Election
Integrity
Integrity.
Committee. This was
Yeah.
kind of we talked about Chris Kobach.
Yep.
About a month and a half ago, we said, watch out for
Watch
this
out for
dude.
him,
He
yeah.
is known to be a suppression of voters, a voting person. He's going after the half a dozen
Right.
votes that were done erroneously,
Right.
really, versus, fraudulently.
Fraudulent, right.
But, he sent out this letter. So he and
all
Mike
50
Pence,
states. Oh, yes, of
his
course.
buddy, right. So he and Mike Pence are chair and co-chairs on the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. And they sent out this letter to all 50 states. And he asked for all publicly available data. But that, which is part of the challenge here, right? But so what he asked for publicly available data, and what he sought was inclusive of the last 4 digits of people's social security number.
What do you tell from a child? Do not give out your social. I mean, even if it is the last word. I mean, this is ridiculous. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And also military status, possible felony convictions, and date of birth. So you can kind of see where this is going, because if you voted, you don't have the social, or you have a felony conviction, or you have your date of birth doesn't, it's all kind of. So of course, many states were like, no.
Yeah.
There was reported 44 states
44.
that had said they would not provide any or some of what was required. There's a lot of different ways the state, like 14 states, including the District of Columbia, just said flat out, no,
Yeah.
we're not doing it. We're not going to play this game. There are another, I guess, 30 states or so that are like, well, we'll provide you what's publicly available, but we don't have that much. Even Chris Kobach's own state of Kansas is not. They're not able to comply fully. So and then there's
California didn't comply either.
well, we know we knew DC wasn't going, California wasn't going. California, as soon as they say Trump says yes, they say no. Oh my goodness. So there's a lot of pushback, and so we'll just have to keep a watch on this. But we knew this committee was bad news, and I'm really pleased though that
Right,
many
that
of the
we're
states are standing up.
red and blue alike.
And there's going to be, I'm sure, something coming out from the ACLU and these other organizations that are going to challenge legitimacy, not just of this committee, but what they want to do with the information that they collect.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Now we got some bright news. At least a bright person to now talk to, and we can get away from the.
Yeah, not a lot of brightness.
Right, not a lot of brightness, but at least Tanya. We're going to introduce Tanya, who is, like I said, a former Terp and Washingtonian. One of my girlfriends who's here she's a professor, Dr. Tanya Golash-Bosa. She's a professor of sociology at the University of California, Merced. Go California college systems, because they're some of the best in the country.
Wow.
It's just I'm not even talking about just academically. I'm talking about for cost to get it. I mean, just it's a well-rounded system that you know, people could take a page from their book. And so she's here with us to talk, and I'm excited about it.
Well, Tanya, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and, you know, some of the things that you're going to talk with us about today?
Sure. So like Sabria said, I'm from DC, graduated from Wilson High School. And then I went on to Maryland. I majored in philosophy at the University of Maryland. After that, I traveled around a little bit, and then I got my PhD in sociology at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And from there, I actually taught 6 years in Kansas, so I'm very familiar with Chris Kobeck.
Right, unfortunately.
May have even been in a protest against Mr. Kobeck when he came to Kansas to speak.
Okay.
And when I was at the University of Kansas, that's when I started getting interested in immigration policy, mostly from teaching about immigration and kind of realizing, you know, I've always been pretty familiar with the injustices of the historical and present day injustices of our system in the United States. But when I found out about immigration policy, I was a little astounded about the complete lack of due process in immigration proceedings and the way you can kind of just be deported with very little notice, very few grounds. So that's how I got interested in working on immigration policy. And I spent 6 years at Kansas, and then I moved to University of California in 2012. And since I got my PhD in 2005, I've published several books, most of them dealing with something to do with race or immigration, racism, deportations.
Very great.
All right, Tanya, can you tell us, because this administration will have you believe that the face of the undocumented or immigrant is that of a rapist, a murderer, or just an overall criminal. What have you found to be more accurate? What have you found to be the more accurate face? Like, what is it that we're not hearing from our president?
Right. I mean, so it's not new that immigrants are equated with criminality. That's something that has a pretty long history in our country. Well, so let me kind of just go back. I'm going to do a little history lesson here, if you don't mind, kind of take it back a little bit to sort of put it in context. So the United States, as you know, is a settler society. People often talk about the United States as a nation of immigrants, which has some truth, but really the United States is a settler society, meaning that people came from other countries and displaced the Native American population. So at the very beginning of this country, there weren't really any immigration controls, right? And so, I mean, many of you still seen the images of Native Americans saying, you know, we didn't ask the Pilgrims for their passports,
right?
Because passports didn't exist back then.
Right.
But the United States really didn't have any immigration policy between its creation in 1776 as a country up until really the first major immigration law was passed in 1882. So if your ancestors are from Europe and they came to the United States before 1882, there were no passport controls whatsoever. No visas, nothing. And beginning in 1882, we passed our very first immigration law, and the name of it should tell you something about what our immigration policy really is about. So the name of the law in 1882 was the Chinese Exclusion Act. So that's our first law. So the only reason we created immigration laws, or this country has created immigration laws in the first place, is this idea of having a better class of people. And so that has just been painted in all kinds of ways. So in 1882, it was the idea that, well, we don't want people from China because they're not the right kind of people in our country. And that also went along with, we don't want prostitutes, we don't want beggars, we don't want paupers, we don't want criminals. And then the next big immigration law was actually in 1924, and that was called the National Origins Quota Act. And what that law did is it said, okay, if you're from like Northern Europe, Western Europe, you can come to the United States. You're more than welcome. We want those people. And so this is in 1924, you know, during the time of Hitler, eugenics. So it was very openly just like, we want a better class of people. That's very much the conversation it was very openly going on in Congress. Like, we want the best kind of people, which are the people that
are not brown,
that are not brown, and not even swarthy.
No, you're right.
So that law very explicitly said, you know, the countries of Western Europe get a large quota of immigrants, and the countries of Eastern and Southern Europe get a smaller quota, and Africa gets 100. Like 100 for the whole
continent of Africa.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And China got 100. And so anyway, basically, it was like very explicitly saying we want to curate our racial stock through immigration quotas. So those laws were overturned in 1965.
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah,
Sounds like
Wow.
sounds like
Yeah.
something's happening.
But you said they were overturned in 65.
Yes.
So that's like 40 years later.
yes,
Wow.
yeah. So 40 years of a very
Exclusionary practices.
Yes, a very explicit exclusionary
yeah.
practices. So interestingly, 1965, that year would ring a bell with people familiar with the history of civil rights in our country. So actually, our current immigration policy is an artifact of the civil rights movement, right? People saying, we shouldn't really have these laws that say people can come from some countries and not from others. Right. We should have more open immigration laws. So the laws in 1965 overturned those quotas from 1924 and overturned, actually the Chinese Exclusion Act was overturned in 1954. So it did have whatever 54 plus 18 is a long, several decades of exclusion of Chinese people from the United States. So in 1965, they said, every country gets a quota of 20,000. So basically the idea was to equalize it. And that was in part pushed by people like J.F. Kennedy, who had ancestors from Ireland, because Ireland had also been, and people who had ancestors from Italy, because Ireland and Italy were two countries that were seen as less desirable. So they opened it up to 20,000 each country. So that's kind of where we are today, and it's very similar to many other policies in the United States. Like in the forecast you're talking, and the broadcast you're talking about the Stand Your Ground law. It doesn't say anywhere in the law, if you're black and you shoot somebody, this doesn't apply to you.
Right.
Like that's not right. It's not written.
Right.
But somehow, when the law is
like that,
it works out. It's immigration policy is the same, right? Immigration policy is blind, allegedly colorblind, national origin blind, gender blind. But the way it actually works is it's really designed to curate the nation. So mostly racially, but the sort of the rhetoric of we don't want criminals is also very racialized, right? So when you say we don't want criminal immigrants, no one's imagining like undocumented Irish in Boston, right? That's just not who they're thinking about.
Right.
Even though a person who's undocumented and from Ireland may or may not have committed a crime, but that's not. They're really trying to focus our imagination on people who are from Mexico, Latin America. When we think of the criminal immigrant, the criminal alien, if you say that word, that's what people imagine. They imagine a male Mexican immigrant, right? That's sort of exactly
100%.
that's exactly who we imagine. And when you say terrorist, we imagine a male Middle Easterner, right? So it's gendered and it's racialized. So by using those kinds of discourses, we're able to kind of recreate these pre-1965 policies, right? So it's in very similar ways to how race and racism work generally in our society. So that's the background. So of course the reality is that if you live in a community with a high percentage of undocumented immigrants, studies show that you're safer than if you live in a community with no undocumented immigrants, because undocumented immigrants are less likely to commit crime than
they want to stay here.
Yeah.
And they want to become documented.
Right. So they're less likely to commit crimes than their documented counterparts. And just in case some of you have seen reports that point otherwise, okay, so on the whole, immigrants, like as a percentage of their population on the whole, you might find that they have a higher percentage of criminal convictions than non-immigrants. But the main reason for that is that immigrants are younger and they're men. So, but if you compare apples to apples, if you say male immigrants from Mexico aged 18 to 40, and you compare them to white men aged 18 to 40, you'll find that the male Mexicans have a lower rate of criminal convictions. But if you just compare all Mexicans to all whites, you'll find higher rates, because it's based on, criminality is very specific, like or criminal convictions. If you look at the population really from 18 to 25, that's the highest. So anytime you have a lot of people in that age range, and men in particular, you'll find a high rate of criminal convictions. So that's one myth. Another big myth is that it's a truism, is that our federal prison system has a very high percentage of undocumented immigrants. Right, so you hear that in the news. There's lots of, all these undocumented immigrants in prison. They're filling up our federal prison system. So the reason for that is that they're being prosecuted for illegal entry. So you can make somebody a criminal really easily. You just prosecute them.
Right.
So you prosecute someone for illegal entry, you give them 5 years in federal prison for that crime. Well, yeah,
There it is.
you criminalize them, you
Right.
incarcerate them,
Right.
and then
And then you use that as a reason to say that they're not fit to be in the country long
Yes,
term.
yeah.
Because
So-
they have a criminal record.
Exactly. So during the Obama administration, one of his main goals was to increase the number of people deported on criminal grounds. And he did that. So in 1 year, for example, 200,000 people were deported on criminal grounds, but 44,000 of them were for illegal entry.
I heard that Obama was not, we talked, I think
he was
we
the
might
high-
have
he
talked
had
about
the-
this
he
before,
had the
but
highest,
Obama
yeah,
had a
deportation
very,
rate. Aggressive.
people were not pleased with him in terms of people who were pro-immigration and pro-immigration reform in a positive way, right? So I think that'd be interesting to talk about because we do always think, Obama was this near perfect president, and for some things he wasn't, and this was one of those things, right?
Yeah, Obama came into the White House with what I would characterize as a right-wing immigration and law enforcement policy. Over the course of his term, he moved towards a centrist policy, but he never made it over to the left in terms of, in any real way, in any real substantive way. So let's just say what happened is, so the United States since 1996, we have been deporting like every year, just more and more people. So between 1892, when we first deported people, and 1996, the United States deported a total of 2 million people, 1892 to 1996. During Obama's administration, 3 million people were deported.
Wow.
So in 8 years, more people than, and so
Wow.
that's more than any previous president. But let me just kind of explain why that is. Basically, what happened is in 1996, when President Bill Clinton was in office, he signed into law legislation that changed deportation laws just fundamentally, dramatically. So those laws made it possible to deport more people. But you can change the laws. It takes a while to build up the bureaucratic machinery and money. So every year you have to get money from Congress to kind of strengthen the immigration law enforcement machine. So beginning in 1996, they kind of began to do that. And it sort of, in 1996, we deported about 50,000 people. And then every year, if you look at it on the chart, it'll show like 50,000, 70, 100, up until, it just kept rising steadily throughout the Clinton administration. So Clinton got to about 900,000 deportations during his 2-term presidency. And then Bush, he got to almost 2 million during his presidency. So when Obama took over, the machine was already like in full swing. So Obama stepped up as president. He took office in 2009. And at that point, he continued to build it. So it wasn't like he just kept it flat. It continued to go up. So when he took office, we were at about 330,000 deportations. And he got it all the way up to 430,000 in, I think, 2011 and 2012, which is a record high number of deportations in the history of the United States. And then it began to level off. And it was only in his last 2 years that it began to decline. So basically what happened is Obama got to office. He kept the machine moving forward until he really got a lot of criticism. So, one message is from this is that large scale protests on the ground, criticism can sometimes change the power, the policies of the presidency. So Obama is rightly labeled the deporter in chief.
I saw that, yeah. Well, you're from California, and a large part of the undocumented worker there is the migrant worker. And what would happen if this wall is built, and then those individuals are no longer able to come here and work?
Yeah. So the funny thing about the wall is we already have one.
Right. This is an extension on the existing wall, right?
Yeah. So the wall is not keeping anybody out. That's just
Yes, we know the wall is
that's not what the wall is about.
But just if they're not just in the world where the migrant worker wasn't able to come.
Yeah. So I'll guess. But let me first just say something about the wall, which is just that it's just political theater. Like there's no a wall. There has been no. Okay. The only time you have a wall that actually keeps people out there's two things we can think of. One is the wall that separates North Korea from South Korea. So if you want a wall like that,
Right.
Oh, sorry. Then there's the wall that
The
separates
Berlin Wall.
the Berlin. That's the other one I was going to go to. The
Right.
Berlin
Yeah.
Wall.
Yeah.
If you want a wall like that, I mean,
Right.
that's a serious wall.
Right.
And then maybe the wall that separates Israel from Palestine. But like, we're talking about walls in repressive
Right.
states,
Yeah.
right? We're not just talking about walls in democratic states. So that's why the wall doesn't really keep people out, because it's a wall. It's a physical barrier. You don't get shot.
Right,
If
for
you try and
traveling,
cruise it,
yeah.
if you try and cross it. Now, if we had a wall like that, probably would keep people out. But that's not really where we want to go, where I don't think anyone really wants. Well,
No,
there's a very small minority of people that
Oh,
want
so
to.
there are some of those.
I do want to go there. But the other thing is that Mexicans are not coming to the United States anymore. Net migration from Mexico is already zero, right? Just as many Mexicans return to Mexico every year as come to the United States.
Wow.
So there's not, so, I mean, that said, so there really isn't an influx of new migrants into California or anywhere else more than that are leaving. But it is true that California is reliant on immigrant labor for food production. And it's also true that everyone in the United States is reliant on California for food production. So where I live in Merced County, California, we produce 90% of the almonds eaten in the world.
Oh, wow.
And those almonds, I mean, they're machine produced, but all the workers.
They're very tasty.
Yeah.
And good for you.
Especially when you live in California,
Right.
you're like, "Ooh, this is what fresh almonds taste like." So anyway, they're really good, and most of the people that work in that industry are migrant workers, and most of them are from Mexico and some from Central America. The same thing, Salinas Valley, where most of the workers are migrant farm workers from Latin America. They produce 90% of the lettuce. If you go to a store right now and buy strawberries, 9 times out of 10, if you look at the label, it will say Watsonville, California. So 90% of the strawberries eaten in the United States are from Watsonville. So it's not just California agriculture that would be affected if we didn't produce food, it's the whole country. So the thing about it is, California has long been like the breadbasket of the country, and that California has always relied on immigrant labor. So earlier in the podcast, I was talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, that comes from Chinese workers in California working on the railroads, working in agriculture. So if you recall, I was talking about this exclusion of Asians during that time period. Now those Asians, Japanese, Filipinos, Koreans, they were the agricultural workers of California. So when we excluded them in 1924, that's when the Mexicans came in to begin to work in California. So all that to say, California has always relied on an immigrant labor force for agriculture. And if you think about the United States, basically we've either relied on an enslaved or an immigrant labor force for agricultural production for our entire history.
Right.
So if we didn't have immigrants picking fruits and vegetables in the United States, there's no one that would pick them. And it's not because some people like to say, oh, well, the Mexicans are better suited for agricultural labor. That's not the case. It's just that they are rural people. So if you grew up in a farm, if you grew up with farm labor, then you're more likely to go into that.
Right.
And if you look at the history of the world, there's very few situations where you see an urbanized workforce transition into the countryside.
Right.
Now you saw that during, the Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. Not a very pleasant experience. Genocide.
Right.
You saw that in Mao's China, right? He forced people to go, and then Stalin, forced. So we could
All
go
great
that way.
examples.
Wow.
But in general, people don't de-urbanize.
Yeah,
it's just
that's true.
The general trend is that people move to the
To
cities.
city.
So really, if the United States did not have immigrants picking fruits and vegetables or harvesting our food, there's no one would do it. So basically, what would happen in reality is that the food production would move to another country.
Wow.
Right. So because there's no way, there's nothing that they can do. They can't
Right.
just raise the wages, increase the benefits, because the point is, people from the city are not going to go pick cucumbers even for $25 an hour.
Right.
Like they're just not going to do it. It's just,
Right.
there's no historical example of a mass migration from an urbanized setting to a rural setting without forced repression. So.
That's so interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, you're working on a new project, and it's exploring mass incarceration in Washington, D.C., and maybe some of the connections between the reentry into society and gentrification. Can you tell us about the project, but also if there's a correlation between mass incarceration and mass deportation?
Yeah, I'll start there, and then I'll tell you about the project, because there's not only a correlation, but basically it's the same system. So, so we were mostly been talking about immigration policy, but a lot of my work has been on deportation in particular. And so 98% of people deported from the United States are Latin American, and 90% are men. And so why is that? Why is that almost everyone deported from the United States is a Latin American male? And the reason for that is, how do you actually get deported, right? And the primary way you get deported is you first get arrested.
Yeah.
So if you're a man, if you're brown, if you're black, you're more likely to be arrested, no matter where you live in the United States. So basically, it's the same system that, the same racialized and gendered repressive system that deports a lot of people and incarcerates a lot of people. So when I was talking to people who had been deported from the United States, for example, I was talking to a lot of people in Jamaica, and I talked to men who were about my age, who had been arrested during the drug war of the late 80s, early 1990s, who had subsequently spent 25 years in prison, and then were deported to Jamaica. And those stories were just heart-wrenching. And for me, it made me think, wow, like they get deported, they spend all this time in prison and they get dropped off in Jamaica. And then it reminded me of people that I knew in high school. Right? So I graduated from Wilson High School in 1991. And there are people that went to prison around that time period who are just now getting back to DC. And so they're similar age as myself. And whereas I've been, traveling the world, working as a professor, writing books, doing all these things, they've been incarcerated, right, for decades. So I was interested in sort of what was happening to them. And then as I'm...
Can I ask a question? Is this because of the drug laws, basically, predominantly?
It's
I mean, when you talk about these long periods of time, I'm like, these are nonviolent offenders, drug offenses?
So that's kind of what I thought going in, that it was mostly that. And there are certainly cases, for example, there's a case of a guy who was arrested for the first time making one transaction to an undercover agent that got life without parole, right? So there are cases like that, yeah. And that's because he was tied in with these conspiracy charges. So that's part of the story. The other part of the story, which I hadn't really grappled with until I started doing the research, is the very real violence that was on the ground. I mean, I'm sure you remember Sabria, in I think DC, 1988, 1999, record high murder rates. When it topped 400. So so a lot of them were incarcerated on drug crimes, but a lot of them were incarcerated on violent crimes. So in immigration, in criminal justice policy reform, people are very willing to speak out for help the what they call the the non-violent, non-sexual. Like there's just the guy that didn't really do anything, that kind of just caught up in the system. And what I'd like to do in this project is really explore the humanity of people who did do something, right? Because part of it is it's sort of trying to get a sense of the circumstances. So, and it's really bringing me back to those days. And, it's interesting. We're sitting right here, very close to Montana Avenue, right? That if you were to walk along Montana Avenue in 1990, you might have a sense of not just why people were selling drugs, because you can see that. You can see the poverty, but also why they might get caught up on a violent offense. Sort of as a young black man growing up in a neighborhood like that, it would have been difficult to avoid any violence. So I'm interested in that violence and also the humanity behind it. And it's complicated, but I'm just beginning to sort of unravel that story. But I don't want to just say, these are just guys, they were just totally just got caught up in the system. There is something real going on. And these communities have suffered not just the taking away of they're mostly the men, but also the real violence that they experienced during that time period.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I love Brian Stevenson's quote when he says, I think you're more than the worst thing you've ever done.
Right.
That to me is a quote that speaks about humanity. You know what I mean? Because society will have you think that the worst thing you ever done is all you are and all you ever be. But I do think too, it's going to be an interesting project, because I do a lot of work with young people. And so we do see very violent communities. It's very easy to get caught up in that lifestyle. But you also kind of see how the violence just traumatizes everyone. Right. So it's when you're talking about criminal justice reform, I know a lot of times I spend a lot of time thinking about, the inequalities of the drug laws
Mm-hmm.
and the cocaine
goodness, yeah.
laws, and the piece, Jeff Sessions wants to do this war, go back to the war on drugs, and how, all the work that Barack and Eric Holder did, but they are really focused on the nonviolent offender
Right.
in a lot of ways. They're focused on the person that was engaged in drug sales,
Yeah.
but they're, normally not talking about individuals that committed violent crimes.
Yeah, recently a young man reached out to me. One thing, those of you who might not know, Washington, D.C. doesn't have its own incarceration system. So if you get sent to jail, you go to D.C. jail. But if you get sent to prison, you get to federal prison. So I live in California, thousands of miles from here, but there are young men or men from D.C. right where I live, which is in the middle of nowhere. Like, it's very hard to get there. If you don't have means, right? There's no airport there.
No.
You basically have to rent a car to go there. You have to fly and then rent a car. So a young man reached out to me. He's from Washington, D.C. He's from not too far from here. He was convicted of murder when he was 17. And he was incarcerated, and he was given, basically life without
He got an
parole.
adult charge. Even though
He was charged
17.
as an adult. And he's spent, not only has he been in prison since then, which I think was about 1992, but
goodness.
he spent 23 years in solitary confinement.
Oh, wow.
From basically the age of like 19
That's
to,
crazy.
it's 23 years in solitary confinement. So anyway,
I don't even know how they continue to do.
Right,
All the
how they-
data shows how destructive that is
It's horrible.
to how we need to socialize as people. That's crazy. I don't mean to.
No,
interrupt,
it's
but-
true. And so he reached out to me, and he sent me this letter that is better than most of my students would write at the university. And he's like, I really enjoyed your analysis of global capitalism in the context of neoliberal economic changes.
Wow.
Wow.
That library must be unbelievable.
Right, and the conversations he's having with
Right.
these other men that he's incarcerated with. But DC recently passed a law that I think it's called the Juvenile Protection Act. So they're revisiting some of those cases.
Oh.
Some of those people that got adult charges as juveniles. So he asked me to write a letter on his behalf, and which I did, and hopefully he'll be released. But I was just sort of thinking about the humanity of that. Like, I mean, I didn't.
Right, going to the humanity of being charged as an adult, so going away, and then the 23 years of solitary confinement.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a miracle that he can write
At all,
in
yeah.
ways that
Yeah.
are rational and
Right,
lucid.
clear
You know what I
thought,
mean?
right.
Because solitary confinement just breaks people down. Well, this project that you're doing sounds really interesting, and the work that you're doing, and just really appreciate.
So you have to come
being
back
here.
once you're
yes,
done.
I mean, 'cause I think this should be a part 2. I just got my lesson today.
Right. And do you have a website that you would like us to did you like to plug, or?
I think the easiest thing would be to follow me on Twitter,
Okay.
Tanya Boza, TanyABoza. There I post links to my work. That'd be the easiest way to find
Awesome.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll have you back for sure if you will come.
Well, I look forward to it. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, ladies.
So, in our final segment, we talk about acting up, which we all are women that act up on the
do.
regular, right? And that's
Right,
part
right.
of just who we are as social justice advocates. So, one of the things we wanted to talk about today, and Sabria mentioned it earlier, was timing, the importance of timing.
Absolutely.
So, July 29th is an important date because
the
that
date.
is the date by which, if this bill does not have the number of the 50
Votes.
votes that are required, it will be, I guess, removed from the
Removed.
floor
Yep.
or something like
And
that
they'll have to
nature.
start again.
Right. And then we know start again is they're going to concede defeat and going to work on bipartisan effort. At least that's what they're saying now. So what we want you guys to do is to continue to call, write, and protest. Make sure your senators know
Who
that
you are.
that you feel that you are one of the 49 million, or someone that you care about is one of the 49 million, and that you do not want this bill to pass. We want to put in a plug for hashtag Protect Our Care, and this is a site that's up right now to take real testimonies from real people. You can do a video testimony, a written testimony, you can do pictures. It gives folks the opportunity to share their story about what losing health care would mean to them, in particular folks who have been able to get insured for the first time through the Affordable Care Act, or who have been able to take advantage of the Medicaid expansion. So there's some really, really wonderful stories there, and we really want to encourage you guys to post your story. We'll be posting ours.
Right, because we're all going to be affected. So we will all be affected no matter what your circumstances. So don't think that, oh, you have insurance. Even if you have insurance, your premiums, if you have a pre-existing condition, i.e. being a woman, will go up. So you have a story.
That's very important. So these stories are going to be sent through indivisible.com to over. The goal is 700 stories. I'm quite sure they're going to probably break that target very easily, and they're going to send those out to all of the senators, and in particular those senators that have indicated that they are going to be a no or a maybe vote. So we really feel like this is collectively something that we can do on behalf of all of the people in our country. So with that, I guess we'll say any closing words. I was going to give the floor to Tanya as our guest. If you have any kind of things you want to say, just to plug whatever concept that you feel you want people to walk away with as like their last thought from you.
Guys, I want to thank people for listening, and I think it's so important for us to stay informed. Our democracy is looking weaker and weaker every day, but one thing that we can do is to be more informed about what's going on, strengthen our analyses. And these are depressing times for a lot of us, but at the same time, I find some hope in all the action, all the people that are getting involved, people that might not have known what the G20 was last year.
Right.
This year, they might have a better idea about what the G19+1 is. So I want to congratulate everyone on trying to stay informed and keeping up with what's going on. I encourage you to keep doing that. It's more important now than ever.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
I wanted to also plug our Facebook page at Black Women Talk Politics. Please like it. Please share it. Please rate us 5 stars. We also want you to check us out. Feel free to post to our site about anything that's happening politically that you think is really important to share with the Black Women Talk Politics community.
Or if you want to be a guest. If you have something to share.
Reach out, inbox us. We'd love to have you on. This is a perfect place for you to talk about issues that are important to you and your community.
Till next time.
Yep. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.